Hi everyone, welcome back. This is 13.1 guided reading. We're working today on this section that's called Marching Towards War. And this is the first section about World War I that we're going to look at. So the way that your guided reading is set up is that it has basically for each box you have a term, and we're going to describe what it is, and then we're also going to describe how did it increase tensions among European nations. So first thing we're going to look at is nationalism. So what is nationalism? And you should have something of a definition along the lines of a deep devotion to one's nation. Question is, how did nationalism increase tensions among European nations? Well, first of all, it caused intense competition among Europe's great powers. And those great powers we're going to call for this time period, we're going to say Germany, Austria-Hungary, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, and France. Now I realize Italy's not highlighted on the map there, but the map does a pretty good job of showing where they were geographically throughout Europe. Also, please keep in mind that nationalism also increased territorial disputes. There was a swath of land that Germany took over from France in a war several decades ago that they wanted back. It's areas called Alsace-Lorraine. There was also different places that Austria-Hungary was trying to incorporate into their empire or had lost previously and were competing with other nations or other countries to try to get back. So there's a lot of rivalry and tension between the countries based on nationalism. Finally, another part that we want to look at is competition for markets and materials. Again, this is after the Industrial Revolution. These countries and nations and empires are trying to get raw materials to make products. They're trying to find places to sell them as well. And so they're competing against each other. And all that contributes to nationalism. Secondly is imperialism. That's what we just learned about, right? But in terms of a definition for imperialism, for here we're going to say the trying to create or enlarge empires by adding colonies. We talked a little bit about the scramble for Africa and how all these European nations were basically trying to carve up and control different parts of Africa. So how did that increase tensions? Well, a lot of rivalries and mistrust, right? Particularly among people, other nations, among Germany, because Germany was kind of late to the scene in terms of getting colonies. They hadn't unified as a country till later in the 1800s, and so they wanted more land. They felt they were a great power. So Germany is part of what's throwing a wrench in the world order. But other countries too mistrust each other in terms of controlling different areas, wanting to control more, and so there's quite a bit of rivalry and mistrust between nations. Mostly we're talking about competition over colonies in Asia and Africa, particularly the ones that make the most money. Next we have militarism. So what is it? Militarism is, in a few word summary, is glorification of military power, right? It's also keeping your army prepared for war, ready to go, ready to fight for whenever you may need them. The contrast to that is thinking about only raising an army during wartime, right? And more of these countries, as we'll see how that led to war, were working to keep an army prepared for war. You also want to be able to mobilize your troops quickly. In this time period, we're talking about some of the biggest largest armies that the world had ever seen, and it takes time to move that many people. And so militarism also gears countries towards being able to mobilize or move those troops quickly. So how did that increase tensions among European nations? Well, first of all, it led to arms races. That's a good kind of illustration here of how that's happening around the time or prior to World War I with this cartoon. All these countries are stockpiling weapons, and they're all right around each other and kind of aiming these weapons at each other to symbolize that, yes, we have these huge stockpiles of weapons, different kinds of weapons that we're developing, and we may need to use them at any given point. It also creates what you call large standing armies, like we mentioned before, how the army is ready to fight. It's ready to go. It's not just called about during wartime. You also have military alliances based on military power, and so different countries are aligning with each other in order to defend each other in case there is a war. So let's talk a little bit more about those alliances. First, we're going to talk about the Triple Alliance. Basically, this is an alliance crafted or set up by Bismarck, who was a German chancellor. Bismarck was distrustful of France, and in the 1800s, you can't really blame him. We studied the French Revolution, but we didn't spend too much time talking about how after Napoleon came to power, he invaded and controlled a very large part of Europe, including a lot of lands that eventually became Germany. And because of this, Bismarck was wary about French military power. So his idea was to bring together at least two of the five great powers so that they would be able to defend themselves against France. But once Bismarck is gone, that thinking starts to shift, right? But Germany obviously still wanted allies, and so they entered into kind of military allies with the Austro-Hungarian Empire and also Italy. So how does this idea of a triple alliance increase tensions among European nations? Well, it's creating an unstable and fragile alliance, right, that is trying to isolate France. Basically, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy are saying, if we can get together, France won't be able to invade us again. They won't be able to take over our lands. We'll be in a good position. But a little bit later comes the Triple Entente. So that's an alliance between Britain, France, and Russia. If you go back and look at this map, you can see that those countries are in red, and that is not exactly the way most Germans would have wanted an alliance to go, because as you can see, they're in a way, they've got rivals on multiple sides of them. So Britain pledged not to fight France and Russia. Traditionally, Britain and France had been fighting against each other for quite a long time, and with this step, it's kind of a major breakthrough for them to be able to say we're not going to fight with each other. And then Russia kind of tags along as well as to again be an ally with Britain and also with France. So how did this increase tensions among European nations? Well, now that you have the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente, you've basically established two rival camps in Europe. On one side, you have what eventually will turn into the Central Powers with Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, although Italy doesn't ever really fight with Germany and Austria, Hungary. And then on the other side, you have Britain, France, and Russia. The idea now is that with all these great powers kind of linked in to these military alliances, at any point there can be a dispute that can draw two of these countries into a battle or possibly into a war, and because of these military alliances, that will also pull in the other powers into a war all at once. And then finally, the last point we're going to talk about today is the assassination in Sarajevo. So a Serbian nationalist goes on and kills and assassinates Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. Now, Franz Ferdinand was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. When his uncle died, he was going to become the emperor. And with this assassination, definitely increases tensions in Europe among European nations. Basically, it gives Austria-Hungary an excuse to launch a war against Serbia. And Serbia is an interesting piece because they're friends with Russia. They're allies with Russia. So when Austria-Hungary launches a war against Serbia, this draws Russia in. And now that we have two of the great powers with those alliances, it's going to bring in a lot of other people and a lot of other nations into World War I. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.